Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
Well, Tony, this is the second time in about 12 hours we're doing a show. And the last time we were doing a show, we were doing the college football playoff rankings reveal, and everyone's just having fun watching ESPN and talking about the college football playoff rankings. And if you were watching on YouTube, there was a point in the show where you started to see Tony and Kevin and I all looking down at our phones all at the same times and wonder, texting people back and that kind of stuff. And some news broke while we were on the show, and we were not in a position where we had it 100% confirmed at that point, but we have it confirmed now. And Tony, it is not good news.
No, it is not good news. Seth McLaughlin, Ohio State starting center, out for the season. So we wanted to put this show together and talk about what that means for Ohio State. We cover the team. This is what we have to do. You talk about it in those kinds of terms. And you almost have to set aside the fact that this is a guy in Seth McLaughlin who came from Alabama. This is his last go around in college. And he's going to miss the last bit of that. But yeah, Tom, I think I was off the show at that point last night when the news broke. So I'm like on the teleconference and I'm looking at my phone, and I was wondering, I was going to ask you if there was a point in the show where you could just tell, like, you guys got the news and you could just see, like, well, this is more important than the CFP right now, because then we were basically just like trapped on the show and couldn't necessarily get all the information that we wanted.
Yeah, well, and there were people in the comments asking us about it, and it's like, well, okay, so here's how this works. We could just throw out, here's what we're hearing right now, but that's not really how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to have a couple sources on stuff before you report it, because otherwise, if you just throw out everything you hear, sometimes you're right, and sometimes you're incredibly wrong. And so being right is more important than being first, especially in a situation like this where, it's not just news. It's not just, here's who the starting quarterback's going to be. It's, hey, this guy who has dedicated probably the vast majority of his life to doing this thing now is not going to get to do this thing in college, potentially ever again. There are other considerations there other than just first. You could be a complete sociopath and think that's the big consideration, but it's not. So, yeah, I think before we move on to the team conversation, I do think we should talk for a minute about Seth McLaughlin, and just, you feel so bad for him because he has, from day one, even from the point where Ohio State was recruiting him, he has done everything right, and has been exactly what they needed at the center position, has been so good and so consistent and such a leader in that room, and just taken charge of everything, and just you never saw issues with him. He played really well all season, on the field, off the field, just did absolutely everything right, was an absolute A+ transfer portal addition. And it just flat out sucks to see his season end like this.
Ryan Day was asked about the impact transfers just on Tuesday, about the leadership of Caleb Downs and Will Howard and Seth McLaughlin, and how, like, just rare that sort of thing is. And Seth McLaughlin came in and became the leader of the offensive line, and he was removing an established starter basically in Carson Hinzman, and yet there's never any friction. The way Carson Hinzman would talk about Seth is like reverence and big brother type of stuff, and everybody's very appreciative to have him there. He fit in. He loves Ohio State, coming from Alabama, and then fitting in perfectly at Ohio State. It was almost like he's always been here whenever you talk to somebody about him. And so, and it'll be an emotional senior day for him and his family, I'm sure, to have it cut short. It always is when you see the senior having to go out there on crutches or whatever. And, that sucks, especially in what will be a Michigan game. But I could not have had a better home run at center. It's similar to what Michigan had done in previous years, bringing in basically the Remington Award winner. And I think Seth McLaughlin was in that vein, and he was working towards All-American status and All Big Ten status, and really, really tied the entire offensive line together and allowed them to overcome some of the issues that losing Josh Simmons and having Carson Hinzman move in, and like a lot of that is able to be done because you have a center that you can trust, that knows what's going on, can help everybody around him, and can get your offensive line right. Also helps to have Will Howard, an experienced quarterback that can help those protections as well. But yeah, so moving forward for Seth, you'd seen Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl and other people talking about how maybe after last season, he was an undrafted free agent. Now they're talking about how moving into the middle rounds and perhaps earlier, this will probably put a dent in that, but it's not going to stop him. He came to Ohio State knowing it wasn't going to be easy leaving Alabama, so he'll keep moving forward. He'll come back from this, and now time, he's just going to be the most engaged graduate assistant offensive line coach in the nation.
Yeah, absolutely. Whoever takes over at center, and we'll get into the couple different possibilities there. I think I know what they're going to do, but we'll see. But whoever it is, he's going to be there right behind them. And just go back a week, last Wednesday, 1 week ago today, that we had an interview with Carson Hinzman on our YouTube channel. I actually posted this in the thread about Seth McLaughlin on our board because it's Carson Hinzman talking about how great it's been to work with Seth McLaughlin and how he's learned so much from him, and he's, they have worked so closely together while Hinzman's been out there, in terms of Hinzman looking at the line calls and looking at the defense and trying to figure out, hey, is this, if I was playing center right now, what would I do? And then listening to what McLaughlin says, because that what McLaughlin says is going to be the correct answer. It's, he kind of has the answer key. He's the teacher with the answer key, and Hinzman standing there and kind of listening and learning and all that kind of stuff. That's only going to continue as McLaughlin has all those years of experience. He can't do it on the field anymore, but now he can potentially be a really good, solid, assistant off the field, another offensive line assistant. And, based on what we know about him, his intelligence, his dedication, his knowledge of the game, I mean, all of that stuff, he's going to continue to be a valuable asset for them, just not on the field.
Yeah, definitely. And so Ryan Day, I went back and I was looking through transcripts to figure out, to try to find the quote, because we've talked about this recently about there was a hypothetical, say if Seth went down, what would you do? And so the two options were, well, Josh Padilla is the backup, but if it was a long-term thing, they'd have to examine it. And so I assume they spent the majority of last night talking through what they want to do first. What the coaches, what should we do? What do we think those options are? And so let's just talk about the first option, which is the easiest. And I wrote about this in What I Know, What I Think, What I Wonder last night about this whole Seth McLaughlin injury and the fallout. They went with the path of least resistance with Zen Michalski at left tackle, which turned out to be the path of least resistance for the defensive line. So that was probably not the right way to go, but it was the easiest thing, the fewest moving pieces. The fewest moving pieces right now would be to put the backup center, which is Joshua Padilla, in, and then leave everybody else. Now, this is a redshirt freshman. He has played, I think, 29 snaps this year, but 17 in the last 2 weeks. Not a lot, and you're going to be going up against some defensive lines that do one against Indiana that does a lot of crazy stuff. The next week against Michigan, which is arguably the two best defensive tackles they'll face in the Big Ten. Not arguably, certainly the two best tackles they'll face in the Big Ten. So do you go with that and leave everybody else where they are? He's your backup, so he's getting number two reps in practice and getting some number one reps too when they're not putting their starters out there necessarily all the time. And there are people on the team who believe that he is ready. They love his intelligence. They he's a wrestler. He's whatever you want your center to be, he is. He just has zero experience. So people say he's ready, but Tom, being ready doesn't mean you are the best option.
Right. They look for the best five. They don't just look for who's ready. And it's certainly possible that this is what they do, because you can construct an argument where this is the choice. And we have not been in practice to see How is Joshua Padilla doing? But I default to the conversation that we had the week before the Penn State game, where Zen Mihalski has gone down, and then it's, okay, what are they going to do? And over and over and over that week, we talked about the fact that top 5 game, hostile environment, you're going to default to the veteran guys who've done it before. That is not the time when you want to throw a inexperienced young guy in there into the fire, into the deep end of the pool, whatever metaphor you want to use. You'd sort of default to who has done this before, where is the floor the highest. And to me, you talk about the snap counts right there. This season, Austin Siereveld has taken 247 snaps. Carson Hinzman has taken 240 snaps. Joshua Padilla has taken 29 snaps. To me, that's kind of where the conversation begins and ends, because Carson Hinzman has only been playing guard for like 3 weeks. He was playing center. He was the backup center all the way through before then. We just talked about the line calls. He has been the starting center for Ohio State for functionally a whole season. He played the entire regular season last year. He has gotten substantially bigger and stronger. He was not necessarily 100% ready to play last year. He was the starting center because Luke Whippler left a year before everyone in the building expected Luke Whippler to leave. And then they kind of went, you. And then he did a solid job last year, probably a year before he was really ready. This year he's ready. And to me, I look at who have they leaned on before. There's not an amazing option. You do not have, we'll just put Jonah Jackson. We'll just pull Jonah Jackson out of the portal and throw him in there this week. That's not an option. So now it's, okay, what are your best options right now? To me, I think you default to the same thing the same conversation we had before the Penn State game, which is you default to the guys who have done it before. Austin Siereveld doesn't have as much experience as Carson Hinzman does, but he has substantially more experience than Josh Padilla does. Josh Padilla next year, Josh Padilla very well may be the right answer there. But right now, I think college football coaches being what they are, I think you're going to default to, this is what we know. This is what we've seen. Has it been perfect? In terms of Siereveld's play? No, it has not been perfect. But you've seen it. He has been viewed as the better option so far this season. I think that's probably the direction they're going to lean.
One thing we haven't seen is how Joshua Padilla is playing in practice.
Correct.
Now, if he's doing everything like good enough to start, but there's a 5th-year senior in front of him, that's another discussion entirely. We have not heard that. That's not been said, but how often is the backup center really being asked about? Not very often. So don't really know how well he's playing in practice other than he's the backup, which is there's a wide gap between being the backup and being a backup who can start in most places and just being the backup. And we don't know exactly where he falls in there. The expectation is that he's the center of the future and would perhaps be the center next year, unless it's Carson Hinzman. And so this is all still going to have to be figured out. I think the last thing with Padilla is last year they went with a redshirt freshman center, and I'm sure at times they were thinking never again. For as well as hard as he played as all of these things with Carson Hinzman last year, he was a year too early. It was too early. And so if you can avoid that this year, like you just did this last year, so now this is going to be your first option this year. I think, again, that's another sign that points us to option 2, which is Carson Hinzman moves from left guard to center, and then you deal with what's going on at left guard. And one last quick point. People have talked about, maybe Josh Padilla is your center, but Carson Hinzman still calls the line plays and things like that at guard, which is a possibility, but he's still got to be able to do all the blocking and things like that you need from that position. So if it is Carson Hinzman at center, now you've got to decide what you want to do at left guard, because right now, Luke Montgomery is your backup left guard. Austin Siereveld is your backup right guard. But Austin Siereveld started, 2 games at left guard at the beginning of the season. So at this point, it's not necessarily who's your backup left guard, it's who's your number 3 guard. And I think we would agree that that's Austin Searveld, unless Luke Montgomery has played well enough to overtake him so far. And they've played roughly the same number of snaps the last 4 games. I think Searveld has maybe like 6 more snaps, but they've played the same number of snaps the last 3 games. And so I'm expecting the thing that makes the most sense based on everything we've seen this far and all of the experience, the experience thing that we talked about with Penn State. This all just points to Austin Searveld at left guard and Carson Hinzman at center. And you've got guys that now have starting experience at both of those spots. This makes the most sense. But Tom, the things that made the most sense is not necessarily what they did after the Oregon game.
Right. And I think that probably goes a little bit into where they were in the schedule at that point, because coming out of that Oregon game, you got to remember, you had not only a week off, but then you had Nebraska the week after that. And Nebraska, I think, you have sort of seen what Nebraska is. Now, the Nebraska game was a lot closer than it probably should have been, thanks in part to the fact that the offensive line really didn't work in that configuration. But you had a couple weeks to sort of mess around and move some people around and try some different stuff at that point. Right now, this happened on Tuesday night. You have really one full go practice. Tuesday and Wednesday are the hard practices every week. They have another practice on Thursday, but it is not as hard full go as the Tuesday and Wednesday ones. When you are trying to figure out what you want to do in the trenches, you got to figure that out really on Wednesday. So now you've got one practice to figure it out. And I'm sure this is something that they have a plan for, that they have at least talked about. And you can have a plan, then let's see how the plan works on the field. Because I'm sure they have not repped a ton with with Carson Hinzman at center the last couple of weeks. They've been working with him at guard.
Mm-hmm.
So you've probably seen some of Josh Padilla at center a little bit, but not a ton. And you don't have that much time to get ready at this point. So, and this is not Nebraska coming to town. This is not, Donovan Jackson's hurt in the first couple of games, so it's Akron, so it doesn't matter. So you're just going to sit him and it doesn't matter. This is Indiana and it's Michigan. And we can talk about Michigan in a minute because this feels like this makes the Michigan game a little more interesting because of where Michigan is strong and where Ohio State now has some real serious question marks. I think also in terms of keeping people from jumping off the roof on this one, I think it's probably worth noting that we've discussed a bunch of potential solutions. And a lot of those solutions, whether it's Luke Montgomery, whether it's Austin Searveld, whether it's Josh Padilla, those are all viable solutions. That's not like, we're going to have a tight end play right tackle now, or we're going to have, you got to move someone over from the defensive line to play tackle. The depth and the interior of the defensive line is substantially better than it is at tackle right now. So, if you gave them a choice, they would choose no one gets hurt. But if the interior of if you had to go interior of the offensive line versus tackle, you have more potential solutions on the interior of the offensive line, which is why you kicked one of your interior offensive line guys out to tackle the last time you had to solve this problem. So, this is not a season ender for Ohio State by any means, but they've got to figure out the right answer, and they got to figure out the right answer pretty quickly because Indiana has been very, very good against the run this year on defense. Michigan has been very, very good in terms of against the run and in pass rushing on defense. So you do not have the luxury of, we got a couple weeks to get this figured out, or, you've got a week off and then a relatively weak opponent. Like, you have Wednesday. So you've got to figure it out pretty quickly. I don't think they have time to experiment with a bunch of stuff. I think they're going to go with that. That's one of the things that really makes me think you go with the more experienced guys because you may not love everything that you've seen out of those guys this year in those spots, but you've seen it. And kind of what the floor probably is.
Yeah, we've said this offensive line is a team full of guards. So, hey, guards and centers, it's a bunch of interior line prospects. You should be able to figure it out. Just looking at the examples of so Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl, I mentioned him earlier. he throws out a tweet saying, prayers to Seth and his family. And I was reaching out to another NFL source, and it's much less caring. It's just like, deal with it. That's guys go down all the time. Guys get hurt all the time. Next man up. You're Ohio State. You should have somebody. Like, the level of just DGAF from parts of the NFL where it's a complete business and next man up. But that's also at Ohio State. It's next man up. Like, the team feels terrible for Seth McLaughlin, but this is not, oh, woe is us. What are we going to do now? Like, they're moving on basically, and they've got a job to do. They still have their goals to do, and one person shouldn't derail that. Now, it's not just one. This is another offensive lineman that they've lost. So, they add up. But if you're going to lose somebody, like we've seen Zach Zinter for Michigan last year, goes down, breaks his leg against Ohio State. They go on to win it all. Injuries on the offensive line. I don't think people understand how often linemen are lost for the year from really, really good teams, and they can make do. I mean, Ohio State's an example of that. Losing Josh Simmons, we don't really talk about that much anymore. Ohio State has been able to move on and pick up the pieces and figure things out. Now, as Tom said, they don't have nearly as much time to figure things out as they did before. And so that's why the experimentation, I don't think you can do. This is what we're going to do. And we're going to go with Carson Hinzman, and we're going to go with the Austin Sierveld, and those are your two most experienced guys. And if they don't go with those two guys, then to me that says that the other options are playing so well in practice that they have the belief that certainly they believe that is the better option, but also indicates that they're doing very well in practice against what you would consider to be a pretty good defensive line, especially on the interior. Still, I'll be somewhat surprised, and we'll talk with Ryan Day Wednesday night. I don't think he's going to be able to deny any kind of injury news here or any kind of prognosis, because it's out there and everybody is talking about it. So, he may give we'll see what we're going to do type of thing. He may not be giving the full treatment on what their plans are after one practice. Like, well, what did you guys do tonight? Yeah, I don't really want to get into that.
Right. Yeah. He's not going to get, I don't think we're going to get the day-to-day thing on Seth McLaughlin, because an awful lot of guys have been day-to-day this year. I don't think we're going to get a day-to-day on Seth McLaughlin, but yeah, what specifically are they doing? I don't think they're going to want to put that out there, with 100% certainty. I also don't know, how did it look today? I don't know how that question's going to get answered, or to what degree that's going to get answered. It's very interesting to me that the two guys who've gotten hurt are the two guys they've brought into the portal who have been just absolute godsends for them. Josh Simmons stepping in at left tackle, where they really didn't have an easy, clear solution at left tackle, and Josh Simmons stepping in and just being a really solid multi-year starter, to the point that people are talking about him as like a borderline first-round draft pick. And then you lose him, and then Seth McLaughlin, who steps in at a position where you saw during the Cotton Bowl what it looks like when you don't have great center play and what a difference that can make. And he just was so solid and so reliable all year. And they had to bring guys in because it feels like they've missed their numbers at offensive line a little bit in recent years, and they've missed on a bunch of their top targets at offensive line in the last couple of years. Well, now it's a homegrown offensive line. No more transfer portal guys. Those guys are not available. So now you've got to do it with the guys they've brought in. And there's talent there, and the line has played better than I expected for long stretches this year, including after the Simmons injury happened. But you're now at the point where they really can't afford another injury, especially at one of the tackle positions. But you're now going to sink or swim on your offensive line recruits, not anyone you've brought into the portal. And I think this is a testament to why, I know Mark for years has been talking about, hey, you're kind of missing your numbers at offensive line, and that's not something you're going to see right away. It's, it's like, oh, well, there's a little bit of a drip in the corner of my basement, and like, yeah, it's just a little water. I mean, it's not great, but and then at some point, hey, there's rot, there's mold, there's whatever. Like, it takes a while to show up. this is when you're going to see. And if they can pull this together this year, then boy, the narrative around Justin Fry is going to be interesting because, you are still seeing the very end of the Greg Studwara tenure and some of the misses there where, Blake Miller, for example, who's at Clemson right now. Blake Miller would sure look good in this offensive line room right now, but that was a Greg Studwara miss. Those guys, it takes so long for those guys to show up. It feels like Stud hasn't been at Ohio State in a million years, but you're still sort of seeing the impact of the very end of his tenure and now the first year of Justin Fry's tenure where they didn't get all the guys they really probably wanted to. It takes a while to show up. This is when it shows up. And this is when Justin Fry is going to earn his money if they're going to have a national championship caliber offensive line. And here's the other thing. I think in terms of what a national championship caliber offensive line means, that doesn't mean the offensive line has to go win you the national championship. It just means the offensive line can't lose you the national championship because they have a national championship caliber in terms of able to win you a national championship at a whole lot of other position groups around the field.
Yeah, the last two national champions didn't have great offensive lines, and you can certainly find more that didn't either. You just have to be good enough to get the necessary points and it's a team thing. So your defense and your special teams also have to contribute. And I'm sure the Ohio State group will do, they'll step it up or they'll intend on stepping it up. So this week they have Indiana, who leads the Big Ten in sacks and tackles for loss. Then they have Michigan, who is number 6 in the Big Ten in tackles for loss and sacks. Then if they get to the Big Ten championship game, you'll have Oregon, who is number 3 in sacks behind Ohio State, number 4 in tackles for loss behind Indiana, Penn State, Ohio State. So, wow. Welcome to the big city, I guess it would be the saying there, because this is, as you said, Tom, it's the deep end of the fire, basically, is what's going to be happening here for whoever they go with. And again, we talked about that schedule and what's coming. And again, that's why I'll just keep going back, and I'm sure you will as well, to Carson Hinzman at center being the most logical choice. But that's without us seeing anybody playing center other than Seth McLaughlin in the past, 3 months.
Right. And that's the thing. What has Josh Padilla looked like in practice the last couple of weeks after Carson Hinzman went over to left guard? That's because Carson Hinzman was with the twos, is my understanding, at center before that. So that kind of tells me, okay, before the last 2 weeks, they felt that Carson Hinzman was the next man up at center. So that to me suggests Carson Hinzman is the next man up at center, unless something has dramatically changed the last couple of weeks. And as you said, there's been a little bit of positive buzz about Josh Padilla out of camp, out of the team in the last couple of weeks. But do they, is that enough? Do they believe that enough to make him the new next man up at center? We'll see. I continue to think they default to the veteran guy, but we'll get a chance to talk to Ryan Day tonight, and we'll get a chance to talk to some more folks around the team and see how that may be developing over the next couple days.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be shocked if we hear more and we actually start talking about it after the interviews tonight when we go live. And we may not hear anything from Ryan Day about who it will be, but we may hear from other people, and we can discuss more of it then. So that will do it here. If you're watching on YouTube, please go ahead and give us a thumbs up. And if you're listening to us on the audio podcast, go ahead and hit the thumbs up. Give us a 5-star rating and review there as well, if you would do so and be so kind. And of course, continue to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We were talking about this for a while last night on the message board, so you can find that discussion and more there as well if you sign up and become a member. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you later.